Welcome to the Solid Signal Podcast for the week of August 16th, 2021. You know, I was thinking, this is, if I am counting right, the 437th podcast that I have done since the beginning of 2013. And it's been a lot. And there's a lot of content out there. And the funny thing about podcasts is they tend to have a very short life. Nobody goes back and listens to podcasts from 2015. I mean, it's ridiculous. But, I was thinking it might be fun to listen to the first ever Solid Signal podcast, which I did in the end of the first week of 2013. I was using different equipment then. It wasn't as good sounding. I wasn't as comfortable doing it. I think I talked slower. It's funny. It's not that I drink more coffee now than I did before, but I just sort of talked a lot slower, and I wasn't super comfortable with it. I'll leave it to you to judge exactly how well I did back in 2013, because I'm going to include the entire podcast right after this. I hope you enjoy it. And I do want to talk, the last thing I want to say is about that piece of music that I use. I always wanted to use a little clip from an ELO song called Calling America, where it says, talk is cheap on satellite, but all I get is static. Unfortunately, I can't play that song for you because of copyright restrictions, and that's why back in 2013, I chose a piece of music which is pragmatically called Pop Band Bumper, and it is free to use. There's no royalty on it whatsoever, and that's why it is the beginning and ending of every podcast, because, we try to stay on a very tight budget for this podcast, always have, and so I, used something that was completely free to use. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoy it, and take a look back at the past of the Solid Signal podcast. I think you'll be amazed at what we've been able to do in the last 8-ish years. Welcome to the first ever Solid Signal podcast. I'm Stuart. You might know me as SS at Solid Signal at the Solid Signal blog. You might follow me at facebook.com/solidsignalcom. This is our first ever podcast. I'm looking forward to it. We're going to be talking about trends for 2013 and beyond. So, without further ado, let's get started. I just got back from the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. The truth is, there was no one breakout product at the Consumer Electronics Show. There were a ton of large televisions, though. Everybody was showing 110-inch television. Even guys who you'd never heard of before were showing 110-inch televisions. And 4K was all the rage. Now, they want you to call it UHD, ultra high definition. I'm not sure that's ever going to catch on. I still kind of call it 4K, don't you? The big problem with 4K in 2013 is that there's no content. Nobody's broadcasting. You can't get a 4K movie because there's no way to even get it to you. It would take hours and hours to download, or they'd more or less have to send you a hard drive. It's a little ridiculous. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is not the year of 4K. 2014 maybe, but not this year. The big winners this year had to be the Chinese manufacturers. Hisense had a huge booth right where Microsoft used to be, and the other Chinese manufacturers weren't that far behind. They're looking to bite into the same market that the Koreans took from the Japanese just a few years ago. And they've got the might to do it. Their televisions look just as good in a lot of cases, maybe not ridiculously stunning, but they should make a big impact at Costco and Best Buy. So if the Consumer Electronics Show didn't give us anything, what are we going to see in 2013? Well, it comes down to two words: fee fights. Every pay TV provider knows that their revenues are getting close to $100 per month per subscriber. That seems to be the magic number. People just won't pay more than that. Of course, if you're listening to this blog, you probably do. You're probably what they call a super user, a high-end user with a lot of premium channels, and that's great. But the middle-of-the-road users just won't break that $100 barrier. On the other hand, you've got all these pay TV companies who want to triple their rates, get paid the same as ESPN, and that's a recipe for disaster. I predict that 2013 is going to see at least two major carriage disputes between a pay TV provider like DirecTV and Dish and a content provider. Remember what Viacom and DirecTV went through this summer? Just like that, except probably worse. longer blackouts, tougher negotiations, and more negative advertising on both sides. On the other hand, the future looks really bright for DirecTV and Dish's hardware. Dish showed their Hopper with Sling, which combines wireless networking, built-in Sling box, and the ability to offload programs onto an iPad. DirecTV countered with an HR44 DVR that's not much bigger than an H24 receiver, also has built-in Wi-Fi, and this thing is a speed demon. The HR34 DVR already moves pretty fast, but the HR44 runs circles around it. I'm hoping that 2013 is the year that people finally discover cell phone boosters. I'll admit, I really didn't believe in these things. I remember those little gold stickers, they didn't work at all. And these cell boosters, they cost a little bit of money, I admit. But here's the secret. They work. I've got a cell booster in my home and it makes all the difference. Well, this year, all the major manufacturers are amping it up. Wilson's got a multi-band cell booster that gives you everything, even LTE support in your car. LTE isn't that important at home. After all, that's what Wi-Fi is for, right? But in the car, it can make a difference between happy kids and sad kids. And happy kids are a lot better than sad kids, right? Our friends at WiX weren't at the show officially, but they let us in on some of their future plans. I can't say a lot, non-disclosure and all that, but let me tell you, it looks like a really exciting year. You've got to stay tuned, read the Solid Signal blog. I guarantee you'll be impressed. I do think 2013 is going to be the year of commercial accounts. Most people don't realize that they can get DirecTV or Dish service in the office for not a whole lot more than they pay at home. There are more expensive packages, and yes, if you've got a waiting room, if you run a bar or restaurant, you're going to pay more. That's true. But in offices, you really don't pay a whole lot. It's worth looking into. On the other hand, if you've got a bar or restaurant, let me tell you, the demand for televisions has never been higher. So expect to see a lot more growth in that arena too. That pretty much wraps it up for our first ever podcast. Honestly, hang with me guys. I'm going to get better at this. I'll get better equipment, I'll get better editing software. This is just the first time. Thanks for hanging on all the way through, and we'll see you next time.